Hey everybody, welcome to A Valid Answer Mondays. How you doing today, Marshall?
Doing fantastic. How are you, Scott?
Doing great. Just getting our names up here, self-producing our show right here on Mondays as we normally do. This is A Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall. It's a conservative capitalist pastor and a socialist liberal atheist. And we get together and have a show and we discuss politics, religion, life, all kinds of stuff. We talked about marriage yesterday on our Sunday shows. We're here Sundays at 5 and also right here on Current Cast on Mondays at 4. So what are we talking about today, Marshall?
I think we're talking about rights.
Rights, not wrongs.
Just rights.
Just right. Sorry.
Although I'm pretty sure you're wrong about rights.
You think I'm wrong about rights?
You might be. You might be. We're gonna explore this. So Scott's kind of a libertarian.
I probably lean more towards libertarian because libertarian is still conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's still that direction, still leaning, because you can see on the screen, I'm on the right, he's on the left. So it just works that way.
That is, in fact, intentional.
Yes, it was. And but what was interesting is that with my cup of water over here, it was supposed to be, I think that one was supposed to be mine, but I really wanted the black cup. So now like the thing is like backwards, and so we got to get a new one of these printed or something like that. But I really wanted the black cup. I think you assumed I wanted the white cup, but I'm like, no, I want the black cup.
Yeah.
People ask me what my favorite color is, and I say black, which is actually the absence of color. I know that it's not actually a color, but anyway.
Yeah, and so you have the theist over here, or the atheist over here with white, which, by the way, is, in fact, one of my favorite colors.
Really?
So there you go.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, so I do. I prefer white. But anyway, we are here to talk about rights today, negative rights in particular, which is this thing that you and I always do rounds over, especially online. And so I kind of want to get into this because even though we've been doing this show for almost a year, we've kind of danced around it. We've kind of clashed on it here and there, specific to individual topics, but we've never actually duked it out over the concept of negative rights, which frankly I think it's kind of bogus anyway. But
it's what is natural. Negative rights is what is natural. So let's clear up in case people are like, what do you mean negative rights? Like rights that are, what do you mean by negative rights? How do we want to define that? What is the definition of that versus positive rights?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're the boss. This is your position. You're the defender today. So I'm going to let you define negative rights. Tell us what they are. Give us a primer, if you will, on negative rights. And then I'll begin to tear you apart piece by piece.
Well, the basic, whether or not it's natural, whether or not, so that's what we're going to get into. But the idea of negative rights is the idea of it's establishing what you cannot do against someone. So these are rights that a government says, the laws, whatever it is, cannot violate these rights. As opposed to a government saying, these are a right that we're going to provide for you. Mm-hmm. We're going to enforce this right and add this right and say that this is a right that must be provided to you. Whereas negative rights these are rights that cannot be violated. You're not adding to it. You're not giving out a right. You're recognizing that a right cannot be taken away.
Can you give me an example?
It's the difference between saying you have a right to life, meaning that you were born with life and life cannot be taken away from you. That's a negative right. You have a negative right of that cannot be taken. You were born with your life and that cannot be taken. Whereas a positive right would be you have the right to be provided a house. Mm-hmm. That's something that's going to be added to you that you were not born with. But now as a government, we're going to say you have a right to receive this. So that's a positive right versus a negative right. And my argument is any governance that says we will provide a positive right also has the ability to take that away. Mm-hmm. And it's a level of control that can have once the government assumes the position that it can grant positive rights, it assumes a position of authority over the people that now has the potential to violate negative rights. Whereas if a government just says, this is the limitation of government, this is how I believe the American government, the Constitution was made, that the founders, that's what the Bill of Rights is. The Bill of Rights is a list of negative rights. It doesn't ever say this is what the government has to do for you. It's literally, this is what the government cannot do to you. It cannot take away your right to this. It cannot take away. You have a right to these things that cannot be violated. That's why the wording is always saying cannot be infringed, cannot be violated. You have a right to these things, and the government cannot remove those rights from you you have a right to that as a natural right. But they're not. It's not. You have a right to what is the search and seizure? I'm not. Which one is that? The fourth?
Fifth.
The fifth? No, the fifth is, I believe the fifth is, you have
right,
self-incrimination.
So
I think the fourth is, unlawful search and seizure, meaning that's your home, that's your place, these are your possessions, that's your home. The government, and without probable cause, cannot violate the sanctity of your home. But again, that's not the government adding a right to you. That's the government recognizing a right that you naturally have. So, and then there's extenuating circumstances, right? If you kill someone, you violated someone else's rights. Now you've lost your right. They can imprison you. Rights can be, if I kill someone, the government has the right to come in and imprison me and violate my rights because I've already given up my rights by violating someone else's.
Do I have a right to expect the government to do that?
What do you mean?
Well, okay, do I have the right to expect the government to send law enforcement, if you will, out to arrest the killer?
Yes, because the government's job is to protect people's natural rights. So if this person violates someone else's natural right, then the government, by protecting this person's negative natural right, has to enforce the laws against this other person because this person has violated that person's natural rights. That's the role of the government. The role of the government is to make sure that your natural rights are not violated. So the government cannot violate them, and the government needs to punish those who do. That's their job. That's the government's job. It's not the government's job, in my opinion, to provide for you and adding positive rights.
But by your own statement, doesn't that imply that the government has an obligation to provide you with police protection?
No. The government is not providing me with police protection. That's not what it's not providing.
What's the government doing?
The government is ensuring that my rights are not violated.
Okay, but now your rights do get violated. Do you then have a right to expect the government to address that?
That's what government is for.
Okay. What about?
But to answer,
isn't that a positive right though?
But no, it's not, because
why not?
Because the government is not ensuring. If the government says we ensure your protection, then that means if anything happens to you, the government has violated your rights. If anything, if you are saying you have a right to police protection, if someone then violates that, technically now the government is responsible because they have guaranteed you protection. And if somebody else is now no longer that person who violated you, now the government has violated you because they have made a promise to protect you. There is no promise of protection in the police. There is no promise of protection in the police. That has been established multiple times. The police are not responsible to protect you.
Capitalism, of course.
Well, no, the police are not responsible to protect you. The police are responsible to enforce the law. So here's this law. If somebody breaks that law, the police enforce that law. But that's not a positive right to you. That is protecting your negative rights and enforcing the law to punish those who violate.
What about right to a lawyer, an attorney? So if you're accused of a crime, the Fifth Amendment says that you have the right to, an attorney. That's also in the Miranda rights. I mean, it's codified. So isn't that a positive right? You now, as the accused, have the right to another person's labor to defend you in a court of law.
If that's not available?
It has to be available. Otherwise, you have to be released.
Then you get released.
And then you go unpunished.
Right,
so
because the
person who did the murder, who the police went out to catch, because you gave the analogy of a murder, the example of a murder. The police have finally captured this person. They've protected the natural rights. They've done what they're supposed to do. But now there's no attorney to try you because we don't agree that you have the positive right to counsel, even though it's listed in the Fifth Amendment.
You have a right to get it. You have a right to seek it out. You have a right. It cannot. That's a negative right. That's still a negative right, saying you have a right to counsel. They don't have to provide it, but you have a right. They cannot deny you the right to counsel. That's what that right is saying. You cannot say, I want a lawyer, and they can't say you don't get one.
Okay, by the way, it's Sixth Amendment, not Fifth Amendment. I want to be precise here. So the end of the Sixth Amendment says, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. So according to the Bill of Rights, you have the right to counsel for your defense.
But again, that's saying it cannot be denied you. You have a right to get it. It cannot be denied to you. They cannot say you don't get a lawyer. You have a right to get a lawyer.
Nonetheless, the Supreme Council, or not the Supreme Council, the Supreme Court, because I'm looking at here referring to counsel as counsel for his defense. The Supreme Court has affirmed that the accused have the right to an attorney. They also have the right to a speedy trial, which then implies that the judge has to hear your case unless you waive that right.
Yeah.
So that also obligates a person to serve as judge and to adjudicate
the case. But again, all of this is within the governance, that the governance is established, the judicial branch, to handle any court cases, all that kind of stuff. That the judicial branch is already established to be there, and you cannot be denied the right to access it. That's what I'm saying. You cannot be denied the right to access it, but they're not saying it's, here's the thing. You don't have the right to an attorney for free. Like the government it's not like the positive right would be this: if you are tried, you will always receive a free attorney.
Well, you will always your ability to pay. If you can't afford one will be appointed for you.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. But if it were a positive right, it would literally be no one would have to pay an attorney. It is provided, and that's the law. The law is you get this attorney. Well, that would be a positive right. This is still a negative right in saying you cannot be denied an attorney. Even if you can't afford it, then we will provide one for you because you cannot be denied.
Which is a positive right for the poor in particular.
Well, that again, it is a secondary thing, because if it was a positive right, there wouldn't be a separate you pay for this attorney. It would always be paid for by the government. Would be a positive right.
What do you mean by a secondary thing? Because in the Sixth Amendment, there's no enumeration of the clauses of the Sixth Amendment. The subclauses are all equal. That doesn't say that this one is before this one or vice versa. It's all one solid block of text. It's one paragraph. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by secondary rights, Scott? I don't understand.
No, what I'm saying is, and that's great. I love that question. What I'm saying is, when it's a positive right saying, mm-hmm. we will provide you an attorney, mm-hmm. that's not what that is saying. That is not literally saying you show up to court and there will always be an attorney that will represent you. You can find your own attorney. You have a right to get your own attorney. You can bring this person in. If you can't afford one, we can provide one for you. But the idea is, if it was a positive right to say, when you come in, there will be an attorney here that will try your case, that would be a positive right. But that's not what this is saying. This is saying you cannot be denied access to an attorney. You cannot. This is coming in from people who are coming in who didn't know the law, and they would just say, well, they'll try. Well, I want to speak to an attorney. You don't get to. They don't get to say you don't get to speak to an attorney, because you have a right, a natural right, to defend yourself in a court. And if you don't have the information, you have a right to have someone who has the information defend you, because that's unfair to defend yourself in court that you don't know.
Now, I might accept that, except for the fact that the Sixth Amendment reads as follows, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll read the first line, which is very important. Mm-hmm. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial, so on and so on, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Now, shall enjoy mm-hmm. implies to me that you will be provided with something. It doesn't mean that we can't prevent you from having. It's not like the First Amendment where it says the government shall make no law, mm-hmm. which prohibits the government. The First Amendment is very blatantly a negative right.
So anytime something says enjoy, that means it's provided for you.
Shall enjoy. You shall enjoy it.
But that means it'll be provided for you. That you're saying that the word enjoy means that it will be provided for you. Anytime that says enjoy.
It will be provided for you if you can't obtain it for yourself. In other words, it's guaranteed to you. And frankly, the way criminal law works in the United States is, yes, you are guaranteed representation by an attorney. And even if you can't afford it and you don't get one, they will appoint a public defender. Now, you'll have to pay it out of your assets. You'll mm-hmm. have to pay. If you can afford it, but
so obviously it's not being provided, attorney. So it's not a positive. So it's not a positive by your own definition. It's not a positive right if you have to pay for it.
But if you can't
It's
pay
not a
for
positive
it,
right.
but if you can't pay for it, it is provided for you.
Yes, but you'll still have to pay for it. You're billed for it.
Not if you can't pay for it.
You just said it was. You said
No,
you still have
if
to-
you can pay for it and you still use a public defender, then you will be billed for it. However, if you cannot, let's say you are destitute, let's say you are homeless, let's say you are simply just plain poor, then you are not billed for it. It's provided free of charge. And look at people who get locked up, who have no assets. Obviously, you know, the lawyer has to be paid, and it's the public that's paying for the public defender, not the accused, because obviously they have no means of paying. So in this case, this is a case where I believe the Bill of Rights conveys a positive right. And so I'm skeptical that the founders of the Bill of Rights were entirely all about negative rights. I'll grant to you, negative rights seem to be a thing, and they're nice things. It's nice to have freedom of speech and freedom of religion.
Yeah.
However, the enforcement, the protection of those rights implies, to me, to my understanding, my interpretation, that somebody has a positive obligation to either, one, not do something to you. For example, I have an obligation to not kill you. And conversely, you, or also, there is the mandate that I protect you or do something to protect you.
So,
For example, water. Do you have a right to water?
No, going back to this.
Okay.
Going back to this. I want to challenge something on that. So it's only a right. What you're saying, it's only a right if you can't afford it. If you can't afford it, then they don't have to pay for it.
So back on the Sixth Amendment.
Yes. So if you can't,
my understanding of how the criminal system works.
So if you can't afford it, then it's not provided for you.
It will be provided for you, but then you have to pay for it if you can afford it. That's my understanding.
Right.
You don't get a millionaire in there who says, "Oh, I can't pay for a lawyer."
So
give
then
me
it's
free public
it's
defender."
not a right. That is not
Why
a
not?
positive right.
How so?
Because a positive right has to be provided for you no matter who you are. If it's a positive right, it is required to be provided for you no matter who you are, from the government, paid for by the government.
You can be the richest person on the planet, and if you don't have a lawyer, one is appointed for you.
Right. But if
Period.
but if you have to pay for it, then it is not a right. It is
But
not a
if
right. So
you don't have to pay for it if you cannot afford it.
no, but again, right there.
If
So
you
now,
can't afford
so
it.
now how much money you make determines whether or not it's a positive right.
Perhaps.
So then that's not a right. Then it's conditional upon your money.
Okay.
And then it's not a
for
right.
the people who can't afford it, it's still a positive right.
Right. No, but I'm saying it is a guaranteed negative right that if you can't afford it, you're still not going to be denied it. But if it were a positive right, then it would have to be provided with no charge for everyone, no matter how much money you had. It would have to be provided by the government, no matter how much money you had and couldn't pay it. But it isn't. If you have the money, you have to pay it.
Okay.
So then it's not provided by the government.
But the money comes after the fact. Whether or not the attorney is provided for free is a subsequent determination. When you come up for your arraignment, for
But
your
you
initial
just said
hearing,
if a millionaire says I can't, I want a public defender and not have to pay for it, that's not going to happen.
They get the public defender, but they'll have to pay for it
then it's
later.
not a positive right.
Later on in the process,
If you have to pay for it, and if
it's
it's conditional upon what you pay, then it is not a positive right provided by the government.
I disagree with you. I think you're.
That's the definition.
I think you're moving the goalposts here.
No, that's the definition. What I'm saying is a positive right is something that's supplied to you no matter what, because it's a right. No matter what, it is supplied to you.
And what if everybody were poor? What if there was no such thing as millionaires? What if everybody in the nation were universally poor?
So that's
would the Sixth Amendment cease to exist?
So in order for you to win your argument, that's how far you have to go?
Well, what I'm telling you is about
come on, be logical.
No, about half the people roughly in the criminal justice system cannot afford their own attorney. And they are provided with an attorney because it is their right to an attorney.
And that's the circumstance that happens. But if
so that's a positive right in those cases.
If in those cases, but it's not.
So boom.
But I'm saying the Constitution is not promising you free. Is not promising free counsel to everyone.
It's promising free counsel to people who cannot afford to pay for it.
Right, but it's not giving it as a right to everyone. If it was a right to everyone, then no one would have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. But if you can pay for it, you are required
now
to.
I'm seeing your distinction.
If you can pay for it, you're required to.
Right.
It's not a positive right because then no one would have to pay for it.
Okay, so if some people pay for it and others don't,
because then it's not a right.
Okay, what about
it's not. No, sorry, it's not an equal right.
Okay,
then. Because you're saying, I'm going to give this to you. Oh, but you have money? Then I'm not going to give it to you. You're going to have to pay me for it. Then it's not equal rights.
Okay, so now what about healthcare?
Same.
Wouldn't healthcare also be a negative right then?
No.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is a negative right because healthcare is distributed the same way as public defenders are distributed. Right. If you can pay for it, you pay for it. But if you cannot afford it, then
it's different.
It's given to you for free.
No, but it's different in the fact that we're talking about the right for you to defend yourself in a court of law, because laws must be enforced. Laws, and the government creates the laws must be enforced. And if the law is going to be enforced against you, you have a right to defend yourself against that enforcement to the best you can. It's still within a natural right. It's still within your right cannot be violated. Your sovereignty cannot be violated. Your body cannot be violated by someone. You have sovereignty over your body. You have sovereignty over, and if someone accuses you.
Remember that when we get to the topic of abortion.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh yeah, we will. Yeah. When we get to that, actually, people might be surprised what my position is. But what I'm saying is you have a right to defend yourself against an accusation. Mm-hmm. You have a right to defend yourself against an accusation. So this whole judicial system is set up. You have a right to have access to the judicial system to defend yourself against an accusation. But that's still based on your sovereignty, your life. You have a right to your life, and things cannot be taken away from you. When you bring health care into this discussion, it is not an equal discussion, because health care is up to you, yourself. You are responsible for your health. No one else is responsible for your health. And any health that has to be provided is all extra. Something has to be done. You have to do something to maintain your health. You have to do something. It's all added. Whereas defending your life is a natural right. A healthy life is up to your choices. Whether or not you live healthy or not is up to your choices. If you decide to jump off a 2-story building and break your leg, your choice led to your health. Whereas your right to live is a natural right that is granted to you. It's not up to your choice. If you're going to kill yourself, that's up to your choice. But what I'm saying is, the right to live is not based on your choices. That is a right that you're born with. Whereas if you want to live healthy, that's up to your choice. And if you're going to make laws that now require things to be positively added to you and positively given to you that your choices affect, it's not equal to the ability to defend yourself, which is based on your right to life and your right to defend yourself. Healthcare is not equal to the judicial system. Your right to health care is not equal to your right to an attorney, because that whole process is in defense of your natural right to live and to defend yourself against an accusation. Whereas healthcare is always a choice. Whether you live healthy or not, if you are by yourself out there in the wilderness, your health is up to you. That's your choices. Go ahead.
Okay, so do you have a right to water?
I have a right to go seek water.
Okay, so
I have a right to pay for it. I have a right to find it.
To drink clean water?
No, I have a right to clean my own water.
Okay.
If I'm out there in a stream, I'm answering your question. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but if I'm out there in the again, it's what's happened if you're out there in the wilderness. If there's a pond and I drink it, and it's still water and there's bacteria in there and everything like that, and I choose to drink it, that's bad water. I'm going to get sick. I'm out there in the wilderness. I'm going to find some flowing water and find some stream, and I might even have to get something to purify it. But that's not a right. I have to make wise choices. Now, if this person says, I've purified, I've done this, pay me for the water, then I'm choosing to pay that person for the water instead of going up into the hills and finding a stream and getting the water myself.
Okay, so...
But I don't have a right for you to provide me clean water.
What if the water supply is contaminated, either by nature or by a bad actor? But let's say the water supply is contaminated, and that's the
I got to live somewhere else.
So you just have to, so if you happen to live in
a community. That's natural law.
Okay.
That's
so
natural law.
Basically, it's every man for himself under negative rights.
Yes. And up to the government to defend your rights that cannot be violated. So if there's a stream and somebody goes and poisons the stream, Now the government that person acted negatively and criminally against people and purposely damaged a stream. Maybe it was an accident. Okay, well, now they got to pay for it. So the government still ensures that and punishes laws that were broken or rights that were violated. But the government does not say, we will provide you, you have a right to be provided clean water. That's a positive right, and that's not the role of the government. The role of the government is make sure somebody isn't polluting the water. The role of the government is make sure someone isn't violating other people's rights. But saying that the government must provide you clean water, that's a positive right that now requires someone else's labor to give you something that you have a right for that you cannot be charged for. If you have a right to it, you cannot be charged for it. It must be provided.
So, okay. So this is baffling to me because I kind of get what you're saying, but it seems very impractical because, once we leave, the coffee shop or the university classroom, we live in a real world where there's a lot of bad actors out there, where a lot of bad actors have a lot of power and they have a lot of money and influence. And the only defense against that then is for people to come together and make agreements. And so as a society, is there anything in negative rights that says we can't come together as a society and make agreements? Can we make agreements? Can we all agree to say, hey, this is how we're going to live?
You cannot agree to violate someone else's natural rights.
Okay. So
you cannot agree. It doesn't matter if you all agree to, because that's what slavery was. We all agreed to violate their natural rights. Are you going to make the argument that that's okay?
Well, sometimes we do make the agreement to, for example, require police protection or require military service or to require taxes be paid or to require that people stop at red lights. Right. We make agreements as a society. Yeah. In the past,
but is it okay to make agreements to violate someone's natural rights?
Well, that's what I'm saying is in the past, some of those agreements have violated people's natural rights.
And those are okay?
Society has said we're going to oppress women, we're going to practice slavery, we're going to do all sorts of things.
And those were okay?
In that time and place for those people, that was the norm. Now, I'm not saying it's okay because subjectively I look back at those things and I disagree with them. Mm-hmm. However, power is a subjective thing. Rights are also a subjective thing, and they change.
There should be rights that are not subjective. That's why they're called natural rights. That's the argument we're making, that there are natural rights that are objective, that must be recognized and not be violated by any authority.
But people are going to violate those rights, and in order to defend those rights, you need things like due process, you need courts, you need police, sometimes you need a military. You also have rights that people agree to subordinate to the common good. For example, like I say, your right to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible is subordinated to the right of other people to also do the same. So we agree to stop at traffic lights. We obey traffic laws. You can't just, tear ass down the freeway. You have to, follow the law, right? Mm-hmm. Things like that. We agree to pay taxes because we all want clean, filtered drinking water because we don't all have the ability to dig our own well or to go to the stream in the middle of our busy day and harvest clean water for ourselves. Mm-hmm. We don't all have the ability to purify our water. We don't have the ability to inspect our own meat when it, gets butchered. So we form a government to handle all of these things that we can't do so that we can specialize in doing things like making videos. But none of those
things are provided by the government. None of those things are provided as rights. Yes, they are.
It's called the FDA.
No, but it's still being paid for. But here's what I'm saying. It's not a positive right that says you must have access to this. Because anything that is a positive right promised by the government now is something that if the government fails to provide for you, has violated your rights.
Well, not necessarily, right? If it's physically impossible for the government to provide
doesn't matter. If it's a right, it's a right.
Clean air, clean drinking water, or food, or housing, or whatever, even if the government establishes something as a right, and it cannot, for whatever reasonable reason, provide that. Let's say, for
then
example,
it's violated your rights.
No.
Yes.
No. How has the government violated your rights? Let's say
that's what I'm saying. That's why you can't have positive rights.
Let me get the example out and then you can answer, okay? So here's the deal. Let's say you have a right to health care. Let's say, 4 or 5 years from now, we finally get universal health care, which we're long in coming in this country. We're well behind the 8 ball on that. But let's say we get universal health care. So now you have the right at any time to go in and see a doctor regardless of your ability to pay, right? At any time, go to the hospital, see a doctor. Or if you get in an accident, call 911, ambulance will come get you and take you to a doctor. But now you decide you're going to go climb Mount Whitney, and you are on the summit of Mount Whitney, and you injure yourself and need medical care. Well, unfortunately, the government cannot get a rescue helicopter or anything to you.
Then they have violated my rights.
How have they violated your rights?
Because they promised, by making it a positive right, they had said, you are guaranteed to have this.
Okay, but...
And if I don't get it, then it's been violated.
But
by definition.
Why do you expect perfect enforcement of positive rights? How is that even realistic?
Exactly. That's why you can't do it. That's why you cannot make positive rights, because it is not realistically able to be provided. You cannot make the promise of a right if it cannot be provided. That's why positive rights don't work. You literally just made my argument. That's why positive rights cannot work.
But here's the thing, is you're committing the error of subjecting the good to the perfect. Basically, you've made the perfect the enemy of the good. And just because we can't do something perfectly doesn't mean we shouldn't still do it.
But you cannot call it a right.
Well,
you cannot call it a right.
Okay, so we can't call it a right. So what do we call it? A privilege?
Yes. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. So as long as I
just
change
like driving
my speech,
just like driving is a privilege. You don't have a right to a driver's license.
So now healthcare, food, water, housing, education, all these things,
are
even
privileges.
though we refer to them as rights in this country,
they are privileges.
You're okay with them as long as we call them privileges?
Yes, because that's what they are.
So
They're
you're
privileges.
willing to pay taxes towards these privileges?
Yes.
You're willing to be a responsible member of society as long as we call them privileges, not rights?
Yes.
Now, what's the distinction there for you?
The distinction is that positive rights cannot be guaranteed. Mm-hmm, you cannot guarantee positive rights. Once you enter into that contract, it opens up so much more power that the government can now say, well, this is now a right that we control. So now we can control all aspects of this because it's a right that we must provide. When it's a privilege, there's less enforcement that can happen than when it's a right. So now if it's a right, then the government has to step in and protect that and cannot be violated and all this it gives much more. When it's a declared right by law, it gives that much more authority to government to control that area. And I'm always going to be away from government control. Mm-hmm. So that's why when you make it a positive right, you are giving that much more authority to government in that area.
Okay, but now with negative rights, the government can't guarantee your negative rights either. They can't guarantee that your right to life won't be taken away by another person.
Right, but it's not their job to protect it. It's their job to enforce it. It's their job to say, you have a right to this. If someone takes that, we're going to punish that person.
But how is that different from enforcing a person's right to clean water? I don't see the distinction because it's fundamentally the same thing. Your right to life, your right to clean water. Water is essential to life. If you don't have water, 3 days, you're dead. Mm-hmm. Same thing with air. If the air is filthy, if it's polluted, if you can't breathe it, you're going to be dead, whether it may be minutes to days to years, but you're going to die. So why doesn't government have a responsibility to ensure access to clean air and water when it already has the ability, when it's incumbent upon the government to protect your life? How is it
not
different?
Incumbent upon the government to protect your life.
Okay.
It is not incumbent upon the government to protect your life.
So what is the government protecting, if anything?
The government is enforcing the laws. It is the threat of punishment that causes the coercion to people not break the law. Mm-hmm. It is not the government's job
so
to
you
protect
don't have a right to life then. But that doesn't make sense to me.
No, you do have a...
You have a right to life.
You have a right to your life.
But nobody's obligated to protect it.
No.
So do you really have a right to life then?
Yes, you do, because I have a right to defend myself. If someone pulls a knife on me and I shoot them because my life was threatened, you can't prosecute me because I have a right to my life that this person threatened to take away and I defended myself. So the law looks at that as self-defense and says that was not a violation of law because you have the right to life and that person was trying to violate it, so there's no crime here. If that person pulls a knife on me and I try to take the knife away and they stab me and kill me, that person's going to be punished because they violated my natural right to life. That's what they're going to punish.
But can you guarantee that person that somebody's going to attempt to punish that person?
They're going to attempt it, yes. That's their job.
You can guarantee that.
It's their job to
You have a right to that effort? You expect the government to do that when you just said the government can't guarantee these things.
No. The government, yes, they can. The government can try to do that. Whether or not they catch them or not, that they have to try to do it. And there's circumstances.
They have to try.
Yes, of course, because that's their job. It's their job.
Now you're owed the labor of law enforcement.
I'm not owed their labor.
You have a right to that labor. That's the only way we can get to your world.
It's their job to enforce the law, not provide for me. Mm-hmm. Their job is to. They're not finding that criminal.
But that's a positive thing.
No.
That's a positive obligation.
No. Listen.
Someone has to do the work.
Hold on. Let me explain this. When that person kills me and they capture that person and they take him to criminal court, who is trying that person?
The government.
Yes, not me. The government is going after that person to enforce their laws. Mm-hmm. They're not doing that for me. They're doing that for them. That's why it's the people. It's the state versus this person. The state versus this person. Mm-hmm. It's not Scott versus this person, the deceased versus this person. It's the state. So no, they're not providing me. They are enforcing their laws. They are doing, and they're not providing something to me. They are providing something for themselves. They are enforcing their laws to bring them to court to represent them against that person who violated my rights. But they're not providing the search to me. They are providing the search to themselves to enforce their law. That's why it's the state versus that. So no, they are not searching for me. They're not going out there and finding the criminal for me. They're going out there and finding the criminal for them to try the case.
Okay. So what's wrong with positive rights? Is there anything wrong with them?
Yes, it gives government too much power. That's the whole thing. That's it right there. Positive rights gives the government too much power. It does.
But what if society chooses to live that way? Don't people have the right to choose how they wish to live?
Like you said, people. So you're saying it's okay for the majority of people to vote to violate people's rights.
Well, ultimately, that's what happens in the world. That's realistic. Whether we like it or not, that's literally the dirty truth of all government and of all society.
But I think the government should be set up to eliminate as much of that as possible, not to bring more to it.
But has that ever happened in history?
Right. Josh is saying it's in a civil case. Exactly. But a murder is not a civil case. Specifically, Josh, you were saying in a civil case, it's so-and-so versus so-and-so. Yeah. But in this case, when they're doing that, and also in a civil case, I'm paying for it. I'm paying for the investigators. I'm paying for all that kind of stuff. So yes, in a civil case, it's person versus person. But in a criminal case, it's the state, and the state is spending all of their money to get the evidence, to find it, to prosecute that person. They're not spending it on me. They're not giving it to me. They're not giving it to my family. They are paying for it for themselves so that they can represent their laws against the murderer. So it is. So just wanted to caught that real quick.
Well, it seems to me, again, my understanding of the way power works is there is a confluence, a coming together, if you will, of consensus and I guess control or people in power. I'm getting this wrong because I have a whole theory mapped out in my mind, and the word isn't really power.
That's right.
But basically, when you have a confluence between I guess maybe those in power and consensus, that's where morality comes from, and that's where the rules that a society operates under comes from. Now, oftentimes, the consensus is broad. You know, you have a large segment of the population, but sometimes the consensus can be very narrow, such as in a dictatorship. You take a look at Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's Communist China, or Hitler's, Germany, for example. You have a narrow consensus that's not necessarily shared, but because the power is concentrated. Okay, but this is how societies work. And whether it's a big consensus or a small consensus, basically everybody is deciding, or somebody with power is deciding, these are the rules we're going to live by, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
It has never been otherwise.
Right. But what I'm saying is that governance should aim to do as little as possible to give itself power. It should do as little as possible to give itself power. It should give it just enough power to accomplish the laws, but not so much power that it is becoming control over the people. It's a balance. It's never perfect. It's a balance. And I'm always saying, let's keep getting it to where it's smaller and less power, not no power. I'm not an anarchist who says we don't need government at all. I'm saying we need the smallest, minimal size government possible to maintain peace, to maintain order, to maintain not a big, huge government that's there to provide for everyone.
But now you're haggling with the devil, aren't you?
Yes, because everything is imperfect. Humans are imperfect. Human law is going to be imperfect. It's always going to be imperfect. That's why it's always a struggle of let's keep getting it as small as possible because it wants to balloon out of control. And I'm always on the side of make it smaller because it will naturally grow. If nobody is saying make it smaller, it will just balloon into total totalitarianism. So there's got to be people on one side saying, make it smaller, make it smaller, make it smaller. That's what I'm championing. That's what I'm championing. That's what I'm saying. That's my cry for this. Make it smaller. Natural laws, negative rights. This is what once you start crossing that and promising and guaranteeing positive rights, it's giving more control and more authority to that governing power, and it's going to take advantage of that, and that's never a good thing when governments are so big. So I'm always on the side of less.
What's wrong with majority rule but with frank exceptions? Because that's literally what we have in the United States today. The majority rules, but there are frank exceptions, which we see in the Bill of Rights.
Right. That's why representative government. That's republic. That's the idea, because it keeps the majority. There has to be a layer of, again, the whole way the republic is set up. You have to have 2/3 majority. You have to have this and this, and the president can veto this, and then you have this. That is all to, yes, majority rule, but not mob rule. So that's why republic is always the best way to do it. Have representatives that haggle all this out. There's better ways of doing it than, term limits is a good thing and all that kind of stuff. We always come back to that. But representative government is always going to be the best way. It's why it was so wonderfully set up originally with all those rules that the judicial branch can do this, the legislation can do this, the president can do this can overwrite that can overwrite this can overwrite that. It's paper, rock, scissors. Paper, rock, scissors, paper, rock, scissors. Keep that. Once you give too much power to one of those things, that's where you start having problems. So you give the president too much power.
Yeah, if the rock gets too big, for
the paper can no longer
cover,
yeah, exactly.
Then,
I'm always saying, keep the power limited. Don't let any side, and especially not all of them, get so much bigger that they're bigger than the people. Because ultimately, that's the thing. Ultimately, the states overpower all of that. Ultimately, the states can get together and rewrite the Constitution outside of the judicial, legislative, and executive branch.
Article 5, I think, of the Constitution allows for that.
Yeah. So that still brings it back to that can be
never
overridden.
happened before, by the way. But
that's what I'm saying. That's as much. Don't ever let those three get so big. Have a caveat that can still bring control over that if it need be.
Well, all right. So I don't know. I think we still kind of disagree, or I don't know. Maybe I don't quite understand. But in my understanding, even negative rights make it incumbent upon other people to service those rights, whether you call it the government or you call a right a privilege. To me, that's a matter of semantics.
But semantics is everything.
But in reality,
meanings of words.
To me, reality is everything. And to me, in reality, you still have people who are obligated to do things, even in a libertarian society, at which point I don't quite see the distinction between positive and negative rights, at least not as clearly as you do. What do you think?
Again, I've always come back to words mean something. People just, it's just semantics. No, words mean something. There is power in words. And if you're going to just say, well, that's just semantics, then you don't understand the real power of words. That literally the pen is mightier than the sword. The power of words and how things are defined is huge. That's why I'm always making this. No, that's not what that means. Don't steal that word and make it your own and redefine it, because once you redefine it, now you're changing things. You're changing the definition. You read it and you're twisting things and you're manipulating things. and no, this is what it means. This is what it does. That's why, yes, those are all privileges. That's fine. Let's have all these, let's have all these things. If we're gonna charge this much for taxes and make this a privilege that you can get, okay, well, we can debate over that. But once you say this is a right, now there is power and authority that comes with that word that will be abused and has very big potential for abuse once you make it a right.
But so there's also power with privileges.
Right, but not as much.
Okay.
Not as much. Again, that's what I'm saying. It's not as much. There's so much more power that comes with defining something as a right than with defining it as a privilege.
Well, if I take away your privilege for clean water, food, or air, I think there's a lot of power behind that. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, this has been a Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall. We'll continue. Here, Scott stretch definitions plenty. Okay, whatever, Josh. But no, well, definitions of words are important. But this has been a Valid Answer with Scott and Marshall. Catch us on Sundays at 5, Mondays at 4, right here on Kerncast. And any last words?
No, I think we covered it. So we're still going to disagree on this. So we'll probably come back to it later.
Maybe sometime. All right. Till next time. See you guys.
Thank you.